A geriatrician. A geriatrician is a physician who takes care of older adults. A gerontologist, a term you also may have heard, is an individual who studies aging. And so I've been a guest researcher at the National Institute on Aging. I've served on the National Advisory Council on Aging to NIH, and a lot of my research has been in older adult care, or in some circumstances related to diseases that are associated with the geriatric population. And so I guess it's fair to say that I'm a geriatrician because I take care of seniors as a physician, clinically, and I'm also a gerontologist because of the research that has been part of my career over the years. The reason why this is important in terms of Alzheimer's disease and memory impairment, and I apologize to all those folks that are videotaping because I move around a little bit and it makes it a nightmare for them, but I can engage the audience here much better. So we'll just have to assume that they're going to be up to the challenge today. Older adults are more likely to have Alzheimer's disease. It is possible for some younger adults to get Alzheimer's disease as well, but it is clearly more prevalent among an older adult population. So in my training, I actually did a 3-year fellowship in geriatrics. I trained at Johns Hopkins in geriatric medicine and gerontology. And when I was there, I spent one of my rotations just doing geropsychiatry, looking at the issues associated with dementia and other psychiatric illnesses prevalent among an older adult population. One of the things that I want to talk about a little bit today are some of the issues that we encounter and where we are in terms of disease intervention, but what is probably most important right now in a disease for which we don't know the cause, a disease for which we don't have a cure, and a disease for the future, at least in the immediate future, I'm not optimistic that we're going to have even an intervention that will dramatically have an impact in terms of the disease progression. As I think most of you are aware, Alzheimer's is only one type of dementia. There are many types of dementias that are out there. All of them are neurodegenerative diseases, so they kill nerves. They do it slowly, progressively. Some of the dementias do it more rapidly, some of them more slowly, but all of them take a few years to a couple of decades to actually lead to a person's demise. Unfortunately, for the non-reversible dementias, of which about 80% of dementias, maybe a little more, are non-reversible, almost none of them do we have any interventions that will dramatically stay the course or dramatically slow down the progression of the disease. So we have a long, long way to go. And in my humble opinion, research to a much greater magnitude is needed for this disease because this is a disease that will take away from the United States of America one of the greatest resources that we have, and that is our knowledge, our experience, if you will. The wisdom that has accrued over years is stolen because of this disease. I think that's probably our greatest resource, and yet it is a disease that we don't even know what causes that disease. And so much needs to be done. And I know that we spend about the same amount of research for Alzheimer's disease as we do for some other diseases that are out there. And it's not that we should spend less on the other diseases. I'll give you an example. AIDS, for example. We were spending about as much money each year for AIDS research as we were for Alzheimer's. Consider the differences, though. We know what causes AIDS. We know how to prevent it, and we can dramatically slow down the course of that disease. And it doesn't affect individuals that have already accrued knowledge. What it does is it takes potential away from individuals that are out there. Alzheimer's disease, as I've mentioned, don't know what causes it, we can't prevent it, and we don't have anything to slow down the progression of the disease. And in this circumstance, there's no question about the potential. These folks have successfully reached their older years. They have successfully accrued a knowledge base, an experience, a wisdom, and it already is there. There's not a question whether they will achieve that. And yet, there is also no question that they will lose that with this disease. What I'd like to do for right now is not focus so much on that. There are some things that are out there on the horizon, so I don't want to be always or seem like I'm totally pessimistic about the disease. Bexarotene and some other drugs that are already available have been identified as agents that might have an impact on the disease. There are some other things that are being evaluated in terms of research that over the course of the next decade or two may make a big impact. But I think in terms of research, we're still waiting for the big breakthrough. Having said that, the focus oftentimes is on the individual who has the disease. And while that is clearly a tragic event to watch someone go through that process, fortunately, in a disease like Alzheimer's, as it progresses, the individual who has it oftentimes is not as concerned about having the disease. They don't fully appreciate that they have the disease. The bigger stressor, and what is very disconcerting, is that the person who provides care for those individuals oftentimes set themselves up for diseases themselves and for a decline in their own physical health. One of our priorities as a society really needs to be to focus on the caregivers of these individuals who have Alzheimer's disease. These individuals are, in many circumstances, some of the greatest heroes in our country. It is easy to look at folks that come back from Afghanistan or from one of the other conflict zones that we have throughout the world, and no question that many of them are heroes when they come back. But for many of them, and when you talk to them, they will talk about it is something that happened in the moment. I did this, I didn't really think about it, I was in there, I did what I needed to do, and the consequences were what they were. With a disease like Alzheimer's, the caregiver has to think every single day about what they're doing. They have an impact day in and day out. They don't get breaks. When they do, it requires an incredible amount of strategic planning for them to be able just to go out to go shopping. It is a very different environment, and they do it day in and day out. And not only have I worked consistently in dementia, but I've been the president of the Hospice Network of Maryland. I've been the medical director for hospices, and I can tell you that at the end of life, when someone has gone through this and you talk to the caregivers related to bereavement, these are the folks that are truly selfless. They've done it because they loved an individual, even when that individual can't remember their name. And they've done it right to the end, and to them, they can't think of anything that otherwise they should have done. That, to me, is tremendous love, tremendous courage, and it is something that most of our society doesn't even appreciate. In our society, we have an interesting dynamic that has gone on. All of us in this room, I think, recognize that racism is a terrible thing, and we have made great strides against racism throughout our recent history. Sexism, a terrible thing. I have 4 daughters at home. I think most of us recognize that sexism is not an acceptable thing in our current society. There is, however, a prejudice that is just as egregious, and yet it's totally accepted in our society, and that is ageism. We are happy to make jokes about older folks, put them all in one category, talk about how they drive, talk about how they do things, and oftentimes it's clouded by a stereotype that is impacted by a terrible disease process that's not a normal part of the aging process, and that is dementia. The majority of our older adults do not have dementia. The majority of our older adults have that wisdom, that experience that has come over the years. They are major contributors to our society in terms of volunteerism, in terms of dollars and cents, in terms of any type of charity work that you want to consider. Most of it is handled by our older adult population. This is not a population that will go out and march in Washington. This is not a population that will protest the fact that ageism exists in this country by tipping over cars and burning buildings. It's not going to happen in that population. This is a quiet population, oftentimes called the greatest generation. Individuals for whom I provide care have lived through a depression, a world war, have gone through all sorts of things throughout their lives that have had them focus on helping other people, not worrying about themselves. Yet, we as a society are very happy to have a bigotry about older adults. And when you combine it with diseases like Alzheimer's disease, that are taking away their friends before their friends die, that are taking away their family, their spouses, before they actually die, we really need to readjust our focus in this country. And we have to have a much better perception and understanding of what's going on with caregivers in particular. Those caregivers, whether they be spouses, whether they be daughters, daughters-in-laws, and in even a few cases, there are sons and sons-in-laws that are providing those roles. But we've got to recognize that it has a dramatic impact on their lives and their health. And we've got to make sure that over time, our research dollars and our interventions in general do not overlook the caregivers. If we were to take all the caregivers out of circulation and rely on our healthcare system to provide care for all those individuals that have dementia, we couldn't afford it. And so those individuals, in another way, save our society untold millions of dollars. And they do it without asking for compensation. They generally do it without even wanting to let other people know about it. In some circumstance, they're embarrassed to take their loved one out to dinner. They're embarrassed to take them out shopping. And so they stay at home in isolation, changing their entire lives, and no one knows it. So we have to, as a society, start to recognize this important, courageous group of individuals, and we have to think about what we can do to help them out.